So welcome to the first episode of this video series that I will be doing from now on, namely answering your strength and conditioning questions. Let's jump straight into it. Our first question comes from Omar, and he's asking whether lifting with speed should only be applied to power exercises or also strength training. A very good question, Omar. So, regardless of the training modality that you use, whether it's compound strength training with the compound strength lifts like the deadlift, the bench press and the back squat, or if you're performing Olympic lifts like the power clean, or ballistic training or plyometric training, I always, if the purpose is power development, I always recommend doing the concentric portion of those lifts with the intention of speed. That is finishing the lift in the shortest amount of possible, the repetition that is, on every repetition. Why do we want to do this? This is because we want to teach our brain to recruit more motor units. The more motor units you recruit, the more powerful the action. And obviously, in many sports, regardless of whether you're a combat athlete, a track and field athlete, a basketball player, a football player, power is very useful for you because it determines how far you throw, how fast you sprint, how high you jump, how hard you punch. And speed is a better stimulus for your brain to kind of trick it into recruiting those motor units. If I just tell myself, okay, lift this with strength, like, how do you even imagine that? Your brain doesn't get the necessary stimulus in a way. But if you tell your brain, okay, lift this lift with speed, you can actually see a picture or a scene in your brain of you finishing the lift fast. And with velocity applied to force, it comes power. This is the power equation. This is why I always tell my athletes to lift with speed, the concentric portion that is. With the exception of rehabilitation exercises. Those will sometimes intentionally be performed slowly so that you produce this muscular hypertrophy to emphasize the muscle part in question when you're rehabilitating from an injury. This is the only exception. Our second question comes from Awesome Irishman 123, and he asks thoughts on Olympic lifts. Okay, so Olympic lifting is a tool that is mainly used for power development, obviously. It involves the power clean, the power snatch, the squat clean and the squat snatch, those kind of things. And they are an amazing tool, and they are usually very fun. Athletes usually love doing them because it looks cool, it feels cool, and it's a nice thing. But the only problem with those exercises is the learning curve. They are notoriously difficult to master. Even simpler variations like the power clean or the block power clean, there is so many parameters like engage your butt, engage your core, have the proper gaze, triple extension, extension of the knees, the hips and the ankles, timing, diving under the bar to catch it. It takes a lot of time. So how I look at it is this: how much will it give the sport in question? Because the Olympic lifting variations, if the main purpose is to give you power in the triple extension phase, that is the ankles, knees and hips, there are much more simple exercises to induce this, to emphasize this, like the trap bar jump or the back squat jump and those kind of things. The only problem is that with the trap bar jump, for example, you don't necessitate catching the bar as you do in a power clean, for example, so it's easy to slack off. With a power clean, you have to extend it and then catch it, so it kind of forces you to produce a lot of power. This is the main advantage with it. Another advantage is that it is very, very fun. This is based on anecdotal experience from my part, but athletes usually love Olympic lifts. So enthusiasm matters a lot as well. If an athlete is voluntarily willing to learn the Olympic lifts, they will approach the exercise with enthusiasm and they will learn in a faster pace and produce more power in comparison to doing something that they find boring. So always as a coach, I am after the enthusiasm. Are they enthusiastic about the exercise? If they are, then I am willing to teach them this. It also depends on where in the training cycle they are and how much time they have and how much they can allocate to learning the lift. All of those factors have to be considered. Other than that, it's just a tool for power development. There's many other tools. It's by no means superior to others. You can get equally good benefits from basic plyometric exercises or ballistic exercises. It's just one of those things that are so fun and it looks cool. Bilal here asks, what is your thoughts on the deadlift for wrestlers? It's controversial, so I'm a bit confused. Okay, so the deadlift when it comes to wrestling is mostly is very sport specific to Greco-Roman wrestling, especially when you do the reverse lift, obviously, because the reverse lift, like Alexander Karelin did, is basically like a human version of a deadlift, like you lift a human instead of a barbell, so it's very applicable to those scenarios. As well as building total body strength, hip extension when you're defending a takedown, those kind of things. And to answer your question about the controversy, which I guess you are referring to the injury risk, any exercise is bad and controversial if it is incorrectly performed, whether that is the bench press, the back squat, or the deadlift. Now, it might be argued that the margin of error in the deadlift is much higher than the former, because there is so many parameters. You have to keep the right gaze, have the core engaged, the butt engaged, push down the ground with your legs and lift with your upper body, like 50-50 extension of the knees and hips. There is so many parameters, and if I just tell you like do it with right technique, it doesn't help you out a lot, because you do not have the necessary imagination and the experience to even conceive what the right technique is. It's like for me, when I see those complicated algebra formulas, if you show me one of them and say, okay, follow this formula, I do not know what that is, because I have no experience whatsoever on this formula. If you could divide this formula into manageable steps that I complete, like easier steps, then I would at least have some track record to even conceive what this formula is. In a similar manner, sports, like lifts in sports, is the same principle. This is why I always say get a coach, work under a coach, a strength and conditioning coach, or join a powerlifting team for a while or a weightlifting team for a while, where you can learn under someone experienced. Don't try to learn this on your own, because once again, you do not have the necessary imagination or previous experience to tell what is right and wrong when it comes to technique. If there is one single tip that I have when it comes to strength training and power training and all of this, don't go at it alone. Even if you watch videos on the YouTube of the correct execution, it's not the same thing as having someone experienced standing next to you and giving you live feedback. Because even if you watch a video that says, okay, keep a neutral back, engage your glutes, and I'm telling this apply this to my videos as well. It doesn't, you might do that yourself in the gym for a while, but there is no one to correct them in real time, and you might think that you are doing it right based on this video, but it's not right, because you might not actually follow what the video says. You're not seeing your own posture unless you record yourself with the phone every once in a while and actually review it a lot, and it's going to cost you a lot of time. This is why it's such a good idea to work under a coach or join a powerlifting club, do anything. Be with someone that is experienced. But with that being said, also anatomical restrictions matter as well. You see, the deadlift, there's a lot of variations. You have the sumo deadlift, the conventional deadlift, and the trap bar deadlift. Generally speaking, the trap bar deadlift is one of the easiest variations to learn, because it doesn't necessitate that you have proximity with the bar, because you kind of stand in the middle in this sort of hollow position, while in the conventional deadlift you need proximity to the bar, and for every single inch that the bar is away from your body, it puts extra stress on singular body parts and it becomes like a mess. So for the vast majority of my athletes, unless they have previous experience in the conventional deadlift, I usually stick with the trap bar deadlift. And sometimes in the conventional deadlifts, like they have such like stiffness in so many body parts and not a proportional or good enough anatomy, so that they can't even do it with the right technique. They have to go over to the trap bar or the sumo anyways. So anatomy matters as well. Anatomy to a large extent determines the technique that you use sometimes. And then we have this gentleman right here. He says, this is bullshit. The shadow self or the persona, whatever you call it, is the real you. Okay, so he's referring to the video that I made, the persona, while fighters adopt the persona, what the purpose of the persona is. Then he continues on about something with John Jones, his dark side, how it affected him. And he says, you're wrong, my friend. Real masculinity is dark, unapologetic, and bold. I don't even know where that is coming from. I've never even talked about masculinity in any of my videos. Like, that's not the niche of this channel, but whatever. Okay, so this guy obviously made a misinterpretation of my video, and he made a bunch of conclusions based on that initial misinterpretation. So let's address the first thing here. The shadow self and the persona is not the same thing, my friend, and I emphasize this in the video. The shadow is aspects that you, according to Jungian psychology, aspects that you unconsciously repress about yourselves. Things that you feel ashamed for feeling, whatever that might be, because of past family conditioning. It might be thoughts about money, thoughts about your sexuality, whatever. You push down those things in your psyche and you're not even aware that you're doing them. It's unconscious, that is. While the persona is kind of a social mask that you present to the public that to make a certain impression. And whether that impression is for the purpose of traction or to protect yourself, it could be anything, but they are not the same thing. So to answer your question, you have misinterpreted the video. So Birthday92 here asks, is there actually a difference between power and explosiveness? Very good question, Mr. Birthday 6. So first we have to understand what power is. Power is force multiplied by velocity in sports context. This means that power can be a consequence of either a reliance on velocity or a reliance on force, or an equal reliance of both. If you predominantly rely on force, you can still produce a high power if it's accompanied by some velocity. And if you rely on high velocity, you can also produce high power if it's accompanied by enough force. When you hear commentators on TV saying, for example, this athlete is so powerful, or explosive rather, this sprinter is so explosive, you think of athletes like Mike Tyson or MMA fighters like Anthony Johnson, those kind of people, they're just twitchy, snappy, like a spring. This is because in the power equation, they have a bigger predominance on velocity. So this is what makes them kind of explosive. This is what those commentators are referring to. While you have some athletes that just have this kind of freakish strength, they are not as fast, but in boxing you still see them knocking out people, just touching them with this kind of slow, awkward punch and just like knocking them out. In the boxing world, an example I have of this kind of athlete is probably George Foreman. Both of those like categories of athletes, they are powerful, but in different spectrums. So explosiveness, the way it is traditionally used, this is just my thoughts, like I have nothing to back this up with really, is probably a higher predominance of velocity. This is what they are referring to, I believe. And this gentleman here asks whether the PCR system and the anaerobic glycolytic system can be trained together. For example, an intense sprint workout, or would that be focused on more on one or the other? Very good question. So, one thing we have to be clear on is that all energy systems are active at all times. It's not like when you're doing a 1 repetition maximum lift that all other systems are suddenly turned off and the phosphagen system gets activated. No, they are all active at all times, but to different proportions. When I'm sitting here talking with you right now, like doing this with my hands, whatever the hell I'm doing, I'm gonna see later, all of my energy systems are active, but I have the highest predominance on the aerobic system because the effort is so low. There is no reason for my body to rely on the more powerful energy systems more. This tells us that it is the intensity of the task that determines the predominance of each energy system. So as you're saying right now, for example, if you would do an intense sprint, let's say a sprint of 50 seconds, then considering that you would go all out on this sprint, like no certain strategy, just all out, in the first 10 to 15 seconds, your body would predominantly rely on the ATP PCR system, as you say. Once this system kind of goes low, it will rely even more on the anaerobic glycolytic system for the remainder of the 40 seconds, that is. And then if you were to continue, both of those anaerobic systems would be out and you would rely on the aerobic system. So basically knowing how long each energy system lasts and what predominance they have based on this time, you can manipulate this knowledge and design strength and conditioning sessions based on the energy system that you want to target. And also this depends on where in the season you are, what your sport is, a lot of things. Like this requires a video on its own. I will talk about it later. So thank you for watching the first episode of this series. If you have any additional questions that you want to get answered, just post them in the comment section below of any videos and I will include some of them. Thank you for watching.